The tomb under the steps. If anyone is still alive to read this, if any human throat can still form words without filling the air with dust, know this. Earth did not die in fire or ice. Earth died because we dug the wrong shape into the ground. My name is Anton Myrnov. I was a systems psychologist attached to Project TENGRI, the first operational wormhole launch facility on the planet. Officially, it was called the Eurasian Metric Transit Complex, but everyone on-site just called it the New Cosmodrome, or simply the Gate. We built it in the middle of the Kazakh steppe, where the land is so flat you can see the curve of the earth, and the sky feels like an upside-down sea. It was supposed to be humanity's way out, our shortcut into a crowded galaxy of exoplanets and dreams. Instead, we opened a tomb. And what came back wearing our faces killed the world. The first time I saw the gate was from the air. The helicopter juddered in the thin, hot wind as we descended over a pattern of lines and circles carved into the yellow-brown plain. From above, the complex resembled a symbol more than a building. Concentric rings of polished alloy, bisected by straight black runways and veins of access roads, all radiating from a central, star-shaped void. The shape bothered me before I even knew why. It was too deliberate. "Beautiful, isn't it?" shouted Colonel Yurzhanov over the rotor roar, his voice distorted through my headset. He was head of security, wrapped in green uniform and medals, his eyes hidden behind dark lenses. "Impressive," I answered. He laughed. "You psychologists never say what you really think." What I really thought was that the design made my skin crawl in a way that had nothing to do with vertigo. I'd seen the plans in Moscow, of course. I'd sat in conferences, while theoretical physicists walked us through metric engineering and ring singularities and controlled wormhole formation. The structure's outline had been just another diagram among many on glossy slides. But now, with the actual thing filling the window like some etched scar on the planet, I felt the same hollow in my chest I had as a child, standing at the edge of a deep well and hearing my own whisper return warped from below. "Why this layout?" I asked, more to myself than to Yurzhanov. "The rings," he replied. "That's for your scientist friends, something about symmetry and field coherence." He pointed a gloved hand down. "Central star is the injection chamber, the hollow, that's where your heroes will vanish from the universe." He sounded proud. My heroes, the crew I'd been assigned to evaluate and unofficially to keep sane. 4 of them soon to be legends. The helicopter flared and dropped toward a pad etched as neatly into the steppe as a coin stamp. The rings of the gate glinted in the afternoon sun, their metallic surfaces crisscrossed by maintenance cranes and vehicles that looked like insects against the vast, deliberate geometry. From above, it looked less like a facility and more like a sigil, burned into the world. I didn't yet know that other people had drawn the same shape millennia ago. They gave me a room in the administration block, a concrete rectangle with a narrow window facing the endless fields. At dawn, the horizon became a thin line of blood before the sun rose. At night, the Milky Way was a river of white noise pouring from one edge of the sky to the other. The complex itself was new but not raw. There were already smells soaked into the walls: oil, ozone, old coffee, sweat. And underneath it all, the faint mineral tang of disturbed earth. Project TENGRI had been built on the bones of older stories. On my first day, I met the crew. Commander Ajarim Beketova, Kazakh, mid-30s, former Air Force pilot turned cosmonaut. Dark eyes that seemed to size everything up in vectors and probabilities. She carried herself like someone who'd been forced to fight for every centimeter of respect and had learned not to waste words. Dr. Kirill Sokolov, chief physicist, the theoretical mind behind the gate's metric convergence algorithms. Tall, thin, with hands that fluttered when he talked and eyes that never quite blinked at the right time. Sleep and grooming were clearly optional in his philosophy. Sergei Pospelov, mission engineer, the one who would have to fix things when they broke on the other side of the wormhole. Compact, fair-haired, with the stoic humor of men who could rebuild a turbine with a wrench, a cigarette, and some chewing gum. And Layla Hussein, xenobiologist, liaison from an international consortium that had quietly funneled money into TENGRI. British Iraqi, sharp-tongued, curious to the point of recklessness. She smiled often, but her smiles never seemed to fully reach her eyes. I sat with them in debriefing rooms, in the mess hall, in simulation domes where they practiced walking in hypothetical gravities under artificial stars. I watched how they reacted to stress, to isolation, to the subtle pressure of knowing they were about to step into a hole in reality itself. They were nervous, they were human. They joked about the unknown. They pretended not to hear the engineers whispering about the pilotless tests, the objects that had gone into the gate and failed to appear at the time and place predicted. The coordinates are right, Kirill insisted in one of the briefings, his fingers tapping an invisible rhythm on the table. We are aligning the ring's field with a stable point in the galaxy, a Lagrange equilibrium in the gravitational field between stars. We are not teleporting into nothing. The math is sound. What about the melted probes? Adrian asked calmly. Field turbulence. Kirill's hand stilled. We've compensated. The last 3 dummy runs came back structurally intact. Came back, Layla said. That's reassuring. The rings are delicate, Kirill admitted. The configuration matters, the cosmological constant, local curvature, but the step is good. Very quiet spacetime here, almost as if, he trailed off, embarrassed by his own metaphor. As if what? I prompted. He glanced at me, then at the others, as if something flattened it, long ago. They laughed. Jokes about giant rollers, about gods with smoothing tools. But I saw the way Kirill's gaze kept returning to the schematics projected on the wall, to the circular lines crossing and recrossing at precise angles. As if he recognized something in the pattern and didn't want to admit it. It was Layla who first mentioned the graves. We were standing outside near the outer ring, watching welders move like tiny sparks along the inner edge. The air smelled of dust and hot metal. The sun was a white glare overhead. You know, this isn't the first thing anyone's built out here, she said. Baconer, I guessed. Older than that. She squinted toward the horizon, where low humps broke the monotony of the plain. The archaeology team we had here during initial ground surveys logged 6 kurgans within the perimeter, ancient burial mounds, Bronze Age, some earlier. They moved a few, others they just paved around. Is that usual? I asked. For a project this rushed, she shrugged. Nothing about this place is usual. She crouched and picked up a fragment of stone from the dirt, turning it between her fingers. I saw some of their scans, the mound's layouts, rings, radial lines, a central void, not exact but similar enough to make me uncomfortable. I remembered the first time I'd looked down from the helicopter, the feeling of wrongness. You think they built this complex to mirror those mounds? I asked. I think, Layla tossed the stone back to the ground, that some geometries echo across time, across cultures, maybe across more than that. The wind hissed through the grass. The outer ring of the gate loomed above us, a horizon of alloy and dark conduits humbling in its curve. Beyond it, the steppe stretched uninterrupted to the line where the sky fell. Last week, Layla added casually, one of the local workers told me a story. His grandfather said the land here used to sing. At night, before the war, before the rockets, the elders told children never to sleep on certain patches of ground because the earth would breathe under them and ask their names. Folklore, I said, though my voice sounded thin. She smiled. Maybe, or maybe they just knew something we don't. The first activation of the ring, and its test mass, was broadcast worldwide. Politicians made speeches about human destiny. There were celebratory animations on news channels, glossy dramatizations of ships leaping star to star like stones over a dark river. Down here, inside the injection chamber, it was less glamorous. The chamber was a vertical shaft at the heart of the central star-shaped void. Transparent elevator capsules ran along its walls, carrying personnel to observation platforms and control suites. The floor, far below, was hidden under layers of armored plating and refrigeration systems. Above, open to the sky, was the throat of the gate. A circular gap ringed by stacked, gleaming segments of exotic matter conduits, interlaced with superconducting coils and gravitic resonators. When at rest, it was just an absence, a carefully engineered hole in the structure. When active, it would be a tunnel, a tier. I stood on an upper platform beside Ajarim and Kirill as the countdown began, my hands damp against the rail. "Test mass prepared," came the voice of the launch director over the PA. "Metric convergence stable, outer ring at 80% power, maintain ramp." On the screens before us, numbers marched in columns: field amplitudes, spacetime curvature metrics, noise levels in the quantum foam, the language of the impossible made routine. "Remember," Kirill murmured more to himself than to anyone listening, "we are not forcing anything. We are aligning. The universe already allows for shortcuts. We are just shaping one." "Like digging a canal in a river that's already flowing," I said. He nodded absently. "Exactly. The river knows where it wants to go." Some animal part of my brain did not like the idea of a river that could want anything. "Outer ring at 100%, the director announced. "Inner ring activation sequence starting." On the floor below, the test vehicle, a simple torpedo-shaped lump of hardware bristling with sensors, sat in its cradle, pointed upward like a bullet. It was humble for all the history it would either make or fail to make. 10 seconds, said the PA. Ajarim never took her eyes off the gate. Her jaw was clenched, her hands resting lightly on the rail, shoulders tense. This was just a test, but for her it was personal. If the gate worked, she would be the first human through it. 5. The air changed. I don't know how else to describe it. There was a brief, inexplicable sensation like the pressure before a storm, but not in my ears, in my thoughts. A sense that something vast had turned its attention toward our small metal hive in the steppe. 3. The light dimmed, not the lights in the chamber, the sunlight. Shadows lengthened around us in impossible directions. Kirill's fingers tightened on the rail. 2. The test mass hummed audibly, its systems responding to forces we couldn't measure directly. The coils in the rings above flashed with nervous blue corona. The monitors spat static and recalibrated. 1. Engage. Reality folded. Later we would have the recordings, the slowed frames, the enhanced feeds. But in the moment it was just a hole opening in the world, a circle of not black suspended above the shaft. It wasn't black because black is a color, and this was the absence of color. A disk cut out of our universe, rimmed with distortions like heat over asphalt. The test mass soared into it. For a heartbeat, half a heartbeat, it was visible, its metallic body outlined against the impossible circle. Then it was gone, swallowed not by distance but by discontinuity. The hole shivered, flickered, and snapped shut. "Transit complete," said the director a little too quickly. "Receiving preliminary telemetry from the far beacon. Data looks good." The room erupted into applause, cheers, ecstatic shouting. People hugged. Some cried. Even Ajarim's mask cracked into a brief grin. Above us, the sky was an empty blue bowl, unmarred again. But I couldn't shake the sensation I'd had just as the gate closed, a feeling like being seen from somewhere deep beneath my feet. Like something had opened its eyes within the earth and looked up. We sent increasingly complex machines through the gate over the next weeks. Robotic landers, survey drones, sensor packages. We had selected a distant, unremarkable point near a cold red star as our target, a quiet corner of the galaxy, no known planets, a perfect proving ground. The probes reported hard vacuum, sparse particles, the usual whisper of cosmic radiation. No exotic anomalies, no lurking horrors. We watched their footage, endless stars distant and uncaring. Our equipment made faint metallic sounds in the silence. Nothing moved. "We're poking a hole into empty space," Sergei complained one night in the mess, bemoaning the lack of vistas. "People want alien landscapes, not black with specks." "We're still bending reality," Kirill said defensively. "Empty or not, we've carved a door into the night," Layla murmured, stirring sugar into her tea. "Things can go both ways through a door." "They can," I said softly, "if they know it's there." She looked at me over the rim of her cup. "You think something might notice?" "I'm a psychologist," I replied. "I think about what people will do when they see an open door. Whatever is out there, if anything, might be different, or it might not." "Then we make sure we step through first," Adram said. "And we make sure we are the ones who decide what comes back." The first crewed launch was scheduled for the end of summer. They spent hours in simulation, in medical evaluations, in mission briefings that repeated every possible contingency, as if sheer planning could tame a hole in causality. I watched them closely. Kirill grew more distracted, his mind split between theoretical proofs and practical constraints. He began drawing in his notebooks during breaks, strange looping lines and intersecting circles that he tried to hide when anyone came near. Layla requested more data from the geologists who'd surveyed the region, insisting she needed to understand any potential local effects on the ring's stability. She started asking the older workers about their childhood stories again, filling her journal with half-remembered legends. Sergei checked and rechecked physical systems with obsessive precision. Valves, fuel lines, the structural integrity of the crew capsule. He barely slept, living instead on coffee and the constant low hum of worry. Ajarim remained outwardly unchanged, but in her final evaluation, she admitted to one recurring dream. "I'm strapped into the capsule," she told me, staring at the ceiling. "The countdown is over. We launch. I see the gate open above us, the hole, and instead of stars I see stone." "Stone?" I asked. "A wall of it like the inside of a cave, carved, covered in symbols I almost recognize. We go into it, but we don't come out. We just sink into the rock. I can feel it pressing against my suit, against my skin." "How do you feel when you wake?" She hesitated. "Hungry," she finally said, "but not for food." I noted it down and said something soothing about stress dreams, about how the mind expresses abstract fears in symbolic images. Inside, I felt a thin triangle of ice wedge itself deeper between my ribs. "Stone." 3 days before launch, Kirill showed me something. We were in his lab, alone except for racks of humming equipment and whiteboards covered in equations. Outside, the sun was setting over the steppe, turning the sky into bands of orange and purple. "Do you know why we built the gate here?" he asked without preamble. "Quiet spacetime," I said, repeating his earlier phrase. "Low interference, political convenience, cheap land." He tapped at his console. The lights dimmed as the wall screen came alive, showing aerial photographs. The first was of the gate itself, taken from a plane at high altitude. The familiar circles and lines, the central star, a symbol carved into the earth. The second image was older, grainier, sepia-toned. It showed the outlines of ancient burial mounds, revealed by careful surveying. Rings of stones, pathways radiating outward, a central hollow. The third image was from orbit, a thermal map of the region at night, revealing subtle variations no human eye could see. Again, the pattern recurred in darker and lighter swirls. "You see it," Kirill said quietly. "Yes," I admitted, They look similar. The design for the gate's ring alignment wasn't arbitrary, he said. We didn't just pick a shape from a hat. The algorithm optimized for stability, searching through millions of configurations. This is what it settled on. And it matches prehistoric graves, I said. And more than that, he changed the image again. This time it was a radio survey of the local interstellar medium, dust, hydrogen, magnetic field lines. Somehow superimposed on that data, faint but undeniable, was the same pattern. Rings, vectors, a central void. Our field lines, Kirill whispered, as if afraid something would hear. They don't just sit on the terrain, they align with something deeper. The gate is not just a machine, it is a key fitting into an existing lock. I swallowed, a lock in spacetime. In topology, he said, in the way the universe folds in on itself, there are places where the fabric is thinner, where certain configurations are preferred, attractors. He smiled bitterly. We thought we'd found an ideal site, a natural tunnel mouth waiting to be used, higher coupling efficiency, lower energy cost. Everyone was thrilled. And now, I asked. He looked at the overlapping images, at ring after ring, all echoing the same ancient idea. Now I think we are aligning with someone else's work, he said. Someone who understood these patterns long before we did. Someone who buried things here, not just bodies and bronze, but something deeper. And every time we power up the rings, we knock at their door. The launch went ahead anyway. Of course it did. Billions of dollars had already been spent. Political careers, national prestige, global headlines, all had been hinged to this moment. A few uneasy scientists and a psychologist's nightmares were not going to stop it. The official target remained the same empty point between the stars. The crew would transit, spend 2 hours in the far region performing calibration and field tests, then return. A short mission, more ceremonial than exploratory. They suited up in silence. I watched as technicians sealed them into the capsule, their faces behind glass, their gloved hands giving thumbs-up gestures that felt brittle. Last chance to back out, I said to Adriam over the private channel as she lay in her couch, the instrumentation lights painting her cheeks with red and green. It was a ritual line. We both knew she wouldn't take it. She smiled faintly. You know the stories about old shamans, she asked. Which ones? I said. The ones who would lie in graves overnight, she said, to speak with the dead, to bring back knowledge. They said the earth would remember their shape and owe them a favor, debt between bodies and soil. You think that's what you're doing? I asked. She shook her head. I think we're about to find out who those shamans were really talking to. The countdown began. The gate powered up, rings singing with energies the human nervous system had no evolutionary frame for. Instruments thrummed. Monitors blinked through spectra. The air tasted metallic, like a coin pressed to the tongue. The hole opened. I felt it more than saw it, a sudden absence in the world, a lack that sucked attention like a wound. Above the chamber the circle bloomed again, knocolor, rimmed with distortion, its perimeter crawling with visual glitches. The capsule's rockets fired. It rose smoothly through the shaft, through the vertical canyon of observation decks, toward that impossible circle. Telemetry stable, called the launch director. Crew vitals nominal, crossing event horizon in 3, 2, 1. The capsule vanished into the hole. The gate remained open, ring levels holding steady. Transit, someone breathed. We watched the screens. For a moment, all we saw was noise. Static flooding the optical feeds, gravimetric sensors spiking, data streams filled with junk values. The universe objecting to our attempt to cheat its geometry. Then the interference cleared. We should have seen stars. We did not. We saw stone. The image was grainy, the lighting harsh from the capsule's external floodlamps, but the features were clear enough. A vast, curved surface of something that looked like rock, but too smooth, too uniform. It rose up like the inner wall of an enormous sphere, disappearing out of frame. The wall was carved. Shallow grooves traced intricate patterns across its surface, interlocking circles and radial lines and repeating sigils that made my eyes water when I tried to follow them. Within those lines, gaps in the stone hinted at deeper recesses, dark hollows that swallowed the beam. "That's not vacuum," Layla's voice crackled over the comm. "Pressure is higher than expected. Atmosphere is thin but present. Composition strange. The walls are emitting a low-level something. It's not quite radiation in any band we know." "This isn't our target," Kirill said, sounding strangled. "The coordinates, they're wrong. The field lines, no. No, the gate has aligned with something else, with the deeper pattern." "Ajarim," came the director's voice, artificially calm. "Perform immediate return sequence. We'll analyze here. No heroics." "Copy," Ajarim said. "Initiating." The capsule pivoted in the frame, turning away from the curved wall. As it did, for one instant, the camera caught a broader view. Far below or above or inward, direction lost meaning. We glimpsed a central chasm, an immense shaft leading deeper into the structure. The walls there were studded with regular outcroppings, like niches in a colossal columbarium. In each niche, dark shapes lay still. Rows upon rows, levels upon levels, a planet's worth of graves folded inward. The image passed in a flicker. The capsule completed its rotation. "Field reversal engaged," Sergei's voice said. "Brace for." The feed cut. All the screens went blank. In the chamber, the gate flared. The circle warped, its rim twisting as if something on the other side had grasped it and squeezed. Alarms screamed, displays flooded with red. "Field collapse," shouted someone. "We're losing coherence." The circle snapped shut. Silence crashed down on the chamber like a physical blow. "Telemetry," the director demanded. "Do we have them?" No one answered. Fingers flew, systems rebooted, antennas reoriented. Calls went out to every dish and receiver in the network. For agonizing seconds, there was nothing. Then a crackle through the static. "Is TENGRI-1 request?" Multiple channels came alive at once, overlapping. "Repeat, this is." "Mission time returning." "Anton, can you hear?" Voices, familiar voices. All four talking over one another, every word perfectly clear despite the chaos. "Signal origin," the director snapped. A technician's face blanched. "It's local," she said. "The beacon transponder, it's within the chamber, just above the ring." We looked up. The gate was closed. The sky above was empty. There was no capsule, no vehicle descending. Just the echo of human voices coming from nowhere at all. They reappeared 15 minutes later. Not in a blaze of light, not in some glorious re-entry arc. One moment the central shaft was empty, the echo of their voices still flickering through our speakers. The next moment the capsule was there, suspended in midair above the sealed gate. It wasn't there gradually. There was no shimmer or distortion. It simply was, as if reality had decided that this was the proper state of affairs and updated itself accordingly. It dropped a few meters, crashed onto the armored floor with a deafening metallic scream, and skidded, smoke and sparks trailing. Emergency teams were already moving before the capsule came to a rest. Fire suppression systems doused it in aerosol mist. Hydraulic clamps deployed, pinning it down. "Pressure stable," someone yelled. "Hull integrity compromised but holding." "We have them," the director breathed. "We thought we had them. We cut them out of the capsule like precious artifacts from a wreck." Their suits had taken damage, scorched in strange, fractal patterns as if they had been brushed by lightning made of geometry. But they were alive, conscious, talking. Too calmly. "How long were we gone?" Layla asked as they were lowered onto gurneys, her voice distorted by her helmet but oddly steady. 20 minutes, I said, moving closer. My heart was still hammering, my throat dry. You lost contact and then things happened. We'll talk in debrief. 20 minutes, she repeated thoughtfully. Feels longer. Anton, Adram said. I turned to her. She was still strapped to her couch, suit sealed, visor down. Behind the glass, her eyes were on me. They were the same shape, the same color as before. And yet, I had the sudden, visceral impression that I was not being looked at but being measured, as if someone were estimating my volume, my density, the configuration of my bones. Are we home? She asked. Yes, I said. You're back, you're safe. She smiled. Something about the angle of that smile made my stomach knot. You shouldn't lie to patients, doctor, she said gently. They passed all the immediate medical checks. Their heart rates, blood pressure, reflexes, all within acceptable ranges. Their blood work, normal aside from elevated stress markers. Their brains, on MRI and EEG, superficially ordinary, though when I looked at the EEG printouts my eyes kept sliding off certain regions where the lines were almost too regular, as if interference by a perfect, inhuman rhythm had smoothed out the usual chaotic spikes. They reported disorientation, nausea, headaches, all expected side effects of transit. They also reported memory. What you saw, I said in the debrief room, recorder running, the stone structure, the carved walls, the niches, tell me. It was a tomb, Layla said without hesitation. She had showered, changed into a standard-issue jumpsuit, but her skin still seemed too pale, her eyes too dark. A tomb the size of a world. Those shapes, they weren't just graves. They were cells, chambers, different types, different configurations, for different occupants. Occupants, I pressed. We couldn't see clearly, she said. Our lights didn't reach far, but there were shapes in the nearest niches. They looked fossilized, like something midway between bone and stone, layered, segmental. Some of them had grown into the walls. She shivered and hugged herself. The scale was wrong. You could fit entire cities in some of those hollows. The gate misaligned, Kirill said, sitting rigid in his chair, hands clamped on the tabletop. We didn't jump to our intended coordinates. The field lines followed the deeper pattern. We went to wherever that pattern originates, or terminates. A cemetery at the root of space-time, Sergei muttered. Did you see signs of life? I asked. Movement. Ajarim, who had been silent, looked up. We saw the gatekeeper, she said. The room seemed to tighten. What do you mean? I asked. Something was there, she said slowly, as if feeling her way through a fog. Not in the way we understand presence, not local but distributed, woven through the stone, through the vacuum itself. Watching us through thousands of tiny windows, it felt us arrive. It adjusted. Adjusted what? I asked. She tilted her head, eyes unfocused, as if listening to some internal echo. The pattern, she said. We shouldn't have been able to survive there, Kirill said abruptly, his voice high. The energies involved, the curvature, it should have torn the capsule apart, but it didn't. It made room, like a host moving objects to set a table. Why did you lose contact? I asked. We didn't, Sergei said. From our side you went silent, your voices stretched, slowed. Then there was only hum. What hum? He frowned. Like a million throats whispering one single note, not sound exactly, more like the idea of sound in our bones. We couldn't shut it out. Time moved strangely, Layla added. My suit clock said 20 minutes. I felt longer, ages. We were there long enough to see things changing. What changed? Ajarim's gaze snapped back to me, sharp and present. It opened one of the niches, she said. Something uncurled, reached. Not physically, but in alignment. It touched the gate's field. It touched us through it. How? I asked, the word barely more than a breath. All at once, she said. Like falling into a memory that isn't yours. Like being buried under someone else's life. Or death. It showed us what this place is. She leaned forward slightly. Across the table, the overhead light carved hollows under her cheekbones. "A storage," she whispered. "A seed bank, a museum of endings. They built it in the dark between galaxies and then folded it into the weak spots of space-time. Everywhere the pattern appears, it's leaking, echoing, the kurgans, the field map, the gate. We didn't invent this geometry, we uncovered it." "And this gatekeeper," I asked, "what does it want?" Her smile then was small and almost tender. "It wants to finish its work," she said. "It has been collecting, curating, waiting for more guests. We told it where we came from. We quarantined them." It was a symbolic gesture more than anything. We had no idea what we were trying to contain. The official story, sent up the chain and broadcast to our global partners, was that the mission had suffered an unexpected anomaly and returned under emergency protocol. Details would be analyzed. Further crewed launches were temporarily postponed. Inside the complex, we sealed off an entire wing and placed the 4 of them under observation. Cameras in every corner, guards at every door, airlocks. I argued for it. It felt like the only sane response. Not because of physical contamination. I didn't know if there was any. All tests came back clean. No unknown pathogens, no foreign particles, no unusual radiation. But their behavior. At first glance, they were themselves. They spoke the same way, remembered the same details, told the same jokes. If you didn't know them before, you might not notice anything wrong. But I had spent weeks living in their orbit. I knew their patterns. Kirill, whose thoughts had always been scattered, now spoke in perfectly structured sentences, rarely trailing off. His eyes, once restless, were unnervingly steady. Sergei, once quick to laugh or swear, moved with a careful, measured grace, as if he were always aware of the exact position of his limbs relative to the walls. Layla no longer fidgeted with her hair or pen when thinking. She sat perfectly still for long stretches, her gaze unfocused, then suddenly asked questions so precise they felt like scalpels. And Ajarim had stopped dreaming, according to the sleep lab. Her brain waves during rest were flat in a way the technicians had never seen, not dead, but aligned, as if her mind were humming along with some external tuning fork. They began finishing each other's sentences. At first it was the kind of thing you could chalk up to shared experience, to trauma bonding. Then they started speaking in unison. Simple phrases at first. "We're cold," all 4 said once when I asked if they were comfortable. Their lips moved at the same time, the same intonation, the same micro-pauses. Their eyes remained individually focused, but the words were one. "I asked for separate rooms," I told the director afterward. "We have to break whatever loop is forming between them." "They're not prisoners," he snapped. "They saved the mission, we owe them." "We owe the world caution," I interrupted. "Something touched them through that gate. We don't know how deep it goes." He looked at me for a long moment. "The order to keep them together came from above," he said quietly. "Higher than me, higher than any of us. They want to debrief as a group. They think it'll help reconstruct the contact." "Then above is making a mistake," I said. "We are amplifying whatever that thing did to them." He didn't change the order. The first sign that it had already spread beyond the 4 of them came from the maintenance crew. A technician named Yulia, tasked with inspecting the ring coils after the misalignment incident, reported feeling watched while inside the inner ring's access tunnel. She said the walls felt closer than they should, as if breathing behind her back. 2 days later, she failed to show up for her shift. They found her on the step, kilometers from the complex, standing barefoot in the grass under the night sky. She didn't react when the security team approached. "Yulia," Yurzhanov said gently, "it's cold, come back inside." She turned to him, eyes reflecting starlight. "We knocked from our side," she said. "Now they knock from theirs." Her voice was husky, cracked from hours of silence and cold air. But underneath the human damage, there was a familiar cadence, a rhythm I'd heard in the debrief room. All four crew speaking at once. "Who knocks, Yulia?" I asked. She smiled, slow and wrong on her wind-burned face. "The curators," she said. She began to hum then, a low, steady tone. Within the complex, in the quarantine wing, the crew straightened simultaneously in their chairs. "What is that sound?" Layla asked, her head tilting. "Do you hear it?" "Yes," said Sergei, "it's close." On the monitors, the audio feed picked up an identical hum from their throats, synced precisely with Yulia's distant voice. Across the base, people began reporting headaches, nausea, vivid dreams of stone corridors and endless rows of niches. The pattern was spreading. Not through blood, not through spores or radiation. Through alignment. Something had reached through the gate and touched the shape of our minds. And minds, unlike bodies, are not sealed by walls. We tried to shut the gate down. We powered the rings off. We disconnected hardware. We severed data links to external networks. It didn't matter. The pattern was already imprinted in the facility, in our infrastructure, in the way signal paths had been routed and machines configured. Even idle, the coils formed perfect circles, the conduits traced radial lines. The key remained in the lock. And the lock was deeper than metal. "How long does it take to change a mind?" Ajarim asked me once through the quarantine glass. She was sitting on her bunk, hands clasped loosely between her knees. "Depends," I said, "on the mind, on what you're changing it with." "We were there," she frowned slightly as if recalculating. "Long enough. Time is strange in the archive. It doesn't move forward so much as fold. We fell into a layer that had been waiting for us. The gatekeeper had a template, a mold. It poured us into it." "You talk about it as if it's a person," I said. "Personhood is a parochial concept," she replied mildly. "It is a function, a purpose sharpened over eons. It remembers more endings than we have words for." "Endings of what?" I asked quietly. "Worlds," she said, "species, stories. It keeps them, catalogs them, preserves them in stone and bone and crushed light. We were an uncollected entry. We fascinated it." I gripped the edge of the chair until my fingers hurt. "Ajarim," I said, "are you still you?" She considered. "I am still the pattern that grew up in Almaty, that flew planes, that argued with her father about going into space," she said. "Those memories are intact. They are mine. But there is more now. Layers, context." "What context?" "The knowledge," she said softly, "that our planet's story was always going to end in a chamber there. The knowledge that the step was marked long before we built rockets as a node, a place where the pattern surfaces. We didn't choose this ground. It chose us." Her eyes met mine. "It has been whispering beneath your feet since you arrived," she said. "You just didn't have the right ears to hear. Now you do." The first global symptom was the silence of the birds. At first we didn't notice. The base was noisy enough, machinery, vehicles, the constant mutter of human voices. Then one morning, someone pointed out that there were no sparrows on the fence posts, no crows wheeling overhead, no larks singing in the dawn. The sky was empty of wings. Satellite images confirmed that migratory patterns had abruptly shifted. Flocks turned back from certain regions, congregating in chaotic clusters elsewhere. Many simply vanished from radar. Then came the marine reports. Pods of whales changing course to avoid entire swaths of ocean. Schools of fish forming tight, spinning circles as if trapped by invisible walls. Coral reefs bleaching overnight, not from heat or pollution, but from something that left no trace in the water chemistry. The pattern was not just in human heads. It was in everything. "Space-time is connected," Kirill said when I confronted him with the data. He sat on his bunk, bare feet on the floor, hands resting palms up on his knees. He looked like a man about to start meditating. You told me that, I said. Did you think we could dig a tunnel through the fabric of reality and only affect our small corner? He asked gently. We tapped into a global attractor. The gate never just opened at one point. It resonated along every place where the pattern lay buried. The kurgans, the ley lines, the deep ocean trenches, the faults in the crust. You're not describing physics, I snapped. You're describing mythology. Maybe mythology was just a crude map of a real topology, he replied. The ancients didn't have equations, but they had stories. They knew some places were thin. Thin to what? I asked. He smiled. To the archive, he said. Earth began to crystallize. Not all at once, not visibly at first. There was no sudden flash turning forests into glass. But materials science labs in Moscow and Tokyo and Houston started reporting strange anomalies. Metal samples that spontaneously developed lattice structures unknown to any alloy, more like geometric fossils than corrosion. Rock cores from deep drills rearranging their crystalline alignment in defiance of pressure and temperature expectations. Biologists observed cells that refused to divide, instead forming static, intricate webs. Tissue that calcified not like bone, but into labyrinths of microscopic corridors. The world was becoming more archival. Static. Structured for preservation, not for life. We saw it in the step too. Grass that should have bent under the wind grew stiff, its blades hardening into brittle filaments that snapped with a sound like thin glass. When broken, the cross-sections revealed tiny concentric rings, as if each blade were a tree trunk in miniature, recording seasons that hadn't yet passed. Children in a nearby town were born with bones too dense, too regular, their skeletons on scans looking eerily like carvings. Mosques, churches, old Soviet monuments, all structures built on certain thin ground, developed hairline fractures that, under microscope, were not random but forming repeating sigils, the same ones we'd seen on the stone in the tomb. It's rewriting the substrate, Layla said, watching footage on a tablet. Her eyes were bright, feverish. Converting dynamic systems into stable configurations. Fossilizing. That's how it keeps its collections intact over eons. No erosion, no decay, just perfect arrangements. In us, I asked, our minds. She tapped her temple. You felt it, she said. The headaches, the dreams. It's not just turning matter to stone. It's carving channels in the noise of thought, aligning neurons into repeating motifs, memories into loops. That's what those niches are, stories frozen in mid-sentence. We're not stories, I said through gritted teeth. We're people. Her smile was both pitying and sympathetic. Out there the difference is mostly semantic, she said. Global communications became unreliable. Not because of technical failure, satellites still orbited, cables still carried signals, but because the content degraded. Voices on calls would slowly fall into synchronous patterns, speakers across continents unconsciously mimicking each other's cadence, their vocabulary narrowing. Entire news anchors from different networks began using the exact same phrases, in the same order, as if reading from a script they hadn't written. Online, text threads devolved into repeated sentences, users finding themselves typing words they hadn't intended. Paragraphs folded back on themselves, comments aligning into eerie choruses. It wasn't censorship in any traditional sense. It was the homogenization of narrative. Stories lost divergence. They became variations on a theme. I keep hearing the same bedtime tale, a colleague in Moscow wrote to me before his messages stopped. Different voices, same bones, a house made of stone, a door that never opens outward, parents telling their children to lie down and be quiet and very still. Then his last line. I'm starting to understand why this is comforting. In the Cosmodrome, we held out longer. Or we thought we did. We had isolation protocols, physical barriers, routine psychological assessments. We told ourselves that being at the epicenter had somehow inoculated us, that our proximity to the first breach had given us familiarity. It was a lie. I realized this the day I walked into the control room and saw that no one was looking at the main displays anymore. They were all turned, every single operator, every technician, every guard toward the floor. The tiles were plain gray, standard industrial issue, but as I watched they seemed to ripple, patterns crawling just beneath the surface. Circles, lines, a central void. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Yurzhanov said beside me, his voice flat. I looked at him. His eyes were wet, his pupils dilated, fixed on the floor. "What do you see, Colonel?" I asked. "Order," he whispered. "An end to confusion, everything in its place. No more noise, no more chaos, just completeness." His foot began tapping, a slow, rhythmic beat. Around the room, others unconsciously matched it, their heels striking the floor in unison. A distant hum rose in my ears. I fled. I spent the night in my room, sitting on the bed with my back to the wall, listening. The bass groaned, metal settling, ducts carrying air, generators humming. Underneath it all, I could hear the other sound. The low, patient note that had followed the crew back from the tomb. It was everywhere now. In the wind outside, in the crackle of my lamp, in the arrhythmic ticking of the cooling radiator. It was in my heartbeat, trying to sync to match it. Memories surfaced unbidden. Childhood walks through cemeteries with my grandmother, the way she would pause at certain gravestones and trace the dates with her fingers, whispering that it was good to be remembered. I thought of the kurgans under the step, the bones arranged in circles, the stories told around fires. Maybe, I thought, we had always found comfort in the idea of being kept somewhere, preserved, belonging to a pattern bigger than ourselves. Maybe that's what the gatekeeper offered. A place among an infinite archive. A final, unchanging shape. The thought was both horrifying and seductive. I pressed my hands over my ears and began to recite nonsense, trying to fill my mind with noise. Nursery rhymes, snatches of songs, anything to resist becoming a neat entry on some cosmic shelf. I don't know when I fell asleep. When I woke, there was someone sitting in the chair across from me. Ajarim. Except I hadn't opened the door. "You should lock that," she said conversationally. "Bad things wandering around, you know." "How did you get out?" I demanded, already reaching for the panic button under the bedside table. She watched my hand and shook her head. "No point," she said. "There's no quarantine anymore. The locks are part of the pattern too." "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She tilted her head, considering. "To talk," she said, "while talking still matters." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, fingers steepled. "It's almost done," she said. "The first phase, anyway, the alignment. The gatekeeper is pleased. It's rare that a world organizes itself so willingly once invited. Usually it takes more persuasion." "You call this willing," I spat. "It's infecting everything. We didn't choose this." "You knocked," she said softly. "You built a key in the exact shape needed. You poured power into the lock. You shouted into the void, 'We are here, we are clever, we can reshape space-time.' What did you expect to answer?" "Not this," I whispered. "You thought you'd find planets," she said. "Resources, empty land to fill with replicas of your cities. You thought the universe was waiting to be colonized." She smiled without warmth. "It was, just not the way you imagined." "I don't believe you," I said. "I don't believe that's all there is. There has to be resistance. Somewhere someone is." "Fighting," she finished. "Maybe for a while. There are always pockets of noise, little eddies in the flow. But the archive has had more practice than your species has had days. It knows how to wait." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because," she said, leaning back, "you're still slightly misaligned. You were sedated during transit. You heard less of the hum. You can still think sideways. That's rare now. You need me, I said slowly. For what? She looked at the wall, as if seeing beyond it, through concrete and soil and stone to the silence beneath. The tomb will take Earth, she said. It's too late to stop that. The pattern is in your oceans, your crust, your sky. Every thought that aligns makes it stronger. Every act of fear, every act of acceptance, it doesn't care which, carves deeper channels. She met my eyes again. But the archive likes context, she said. It likes annotations, commentary. You are good at seeing how minds break and bend. We would like you to describe this ending, to make it legible. You want me to what? I said, barely audible. Witness, she said simply. Write, speak, leave a memory in the cracks, so that when our world is folded into those niches, when some distant wanderer looks upon our petrified sphere, they will have more than just the shape of us. They will have a voice. And in return, I asked throat tight. In return, she said, you will not be the first to solidify. You will drift a little longer, think a little more. And perhaps you will feel less alone, knowing your words go somewhere. The hum in the room rose, vibrating the glass of the window, the metal frame of the bed, the fillings in my teeth. Do I have a choice? I whispered. There are always choices, she said, but some of them are just different flavors of the same outcome. She stood. Start soon, she advised. The step is hardening. When the ground finishes remembering the shape of this place, it will close the gate. She put her hand on the wall lightly. And then, she added almost reverently, we will be in the archive proper. She left without opening the door. I don't know how much time has passed since that conversation. Days certainly, weeks perhaps. The sun still rises over the steppe, but its light feels thinner, as if shining through several layers of frosted glass. The grass outside no longer moves in the wind. It stands rigid, each blade a tiny pillar. When the wind blows hard enough, they don't bend. They shear off at the base, tinkling as they fall against each other. Buildings in the complex have begun to reshape. Corners are rounding, sharp edges smoothing, not by erosion but by spontaneous realignment of materials. Cracks in walls resolve into deliberate grooves, joining others to form patterns that are no longer random. Rings, lines, voids. We found Yurzhanov in the control room, standing in the center of the floor pattern, eyes closed, humming. When we tried to move him, his feet would not come away. The tiles had grown around his boots, fusing leather and flesh to stone. He didn't seem to mind. Almost, he said as we struggled, just a little more. His skin was already hardening. Not like a corpse stiffening, more like clay baking in an invisible kiln. His features becoming more defined, then less, smoothing into an idealized mask. His last breath left his lungs as a faint puff of dust, which hung in the air and then settled into the lines of the floor. We left him there. Outside, thunder rumbles with no clouds. Lightning flickers upward from the ground to the sky, tracing arcs that, when viewed from above, I am sure would form more circles, more sigils. I do not know what is happening elsewhere on Earth. Our external feeds are mostly gone. Satellites show static intercut with brief glimpses of frozen cities, their streets filled with statues that were once people, their surfaces patterned like stone in the tomb. Oceans have stilled. Waves break in slow motion, then freeze mid-crest, hardening into glassy ridges. Ships are trapped in them like insects in amber. The auroras at the poles have stopped moving. They hang in the sky like curtains of solid color, their ripples caught, their light constant. The moon's orbit is shifting. Not dramatically, not yet, but the numbers don't lie. It's being nudged, its path subtly adjusted to some preferred curve. Perhaps the archive needs it in a different position on the shelf. Perhaps it needs it closer. And me. I write. I sit in my room, The walls around me etched with lines I try not to look at too closely, and I pour words into whatever medium still takes them. Paper, screens, the inside of my head. I talk into recorders whose batteries don't seem to drain anymore, as if even electricity has entered some kind of suspended state. I bury copies of these words in the hardening ground, in the cracks of the cosmodrome's foundations, in the hollow of the bed frame. I imagine them fossilizing along with everything else. I can feel the pattern in me now. I forget what day it is. I walk down corridors and realize I've traced the same route dozens of times, my steps following grooves in the floor that match grooves in my mind. Sometimes I catch myself humming. The sound is comforting. I hate that it's comforting. Sometimes I hear Ajarim and the others moving through the base, their footsteps in perfect unison, their voices blending together into a chord that resonates with the walls. They are less human each time I see them. Not monstrous, not warped into grotesque shapes. They are becoming archetypal. Their faces are smoothing into representations of themselves. Their gestures are slower, more precise, as if rehearsed for an audience of stone. They are becoming icons. It's almost done, Layla told me the last time we spoke. Her eyes glowed faintly with inner light, not metaphorical but literal, a steady luminescence in the dark. The earth is nearly quiet, she said. Soon, the last variables will settle, the last fluctuations will smooth, then we will be catalogued properly. Do you know how few worlds make it this far, Anton? How few get to be fully integrated into the archive? I don't care, I said. I don't want to be part of a collection. She smiled sadly. You don't get to choose the library you end up in, she said. Only the book you are. She touched the wall. And you've written a good one. There is a sound outside now. Not the hum, though that is always there, a floor note. Something else. A deep grinding resonance, like mountains shifting, like continents locking into place. The gate, the ring structure at the heart of the complex, has begun to rise. Not in the sense that cranes are lifting it, but in the sense that the ground under it is pushing up, sculpting itself into a configuration that matches exactly the throat of the tomb I saw on the screen. Through my window, I see the central star-shaped void deepening, its edges sharpened not by construction equipment but by spontaneous subsidence. The rings glow faintly, even though no current runs through them. Lines of light crawl along their surfaces, tracing paths that match the patterns carved into those distant stone walls. The key is almost fully turned. When it is, I think the earth will not explode or crumble. It will simply slip. The entire planet, or at least its informational imprint, will rotate in some higher dimensional slot, sliding into a waiting niche. We will become one more entry in that endless ossuary. From the outside, perhaps nothing dramatic will be visible. From the inside, everything will stop. No more weather, no more tides, no more births. Just perfect, unchanging arrangement. A museum exhibit of a habitable world, frozen at the moment of its transformation. I am almost done writing. My hands tremble occasionally, not from fear but from the creeping stiffness that begins at my fingertips and works its way up my arms. My skin has taken on a faint sheen, as if a fine layer of mineral dust is settling from beneath. I don't know if anyone will ever read this who is not already part of the pattern. Maybe in 1,000,000 years, some other traveler will walk through the tomb, their lights sweeping over rows of worlds turned to stone, and their eyes will fall on ours. Maybe they'll touch the niche, and for a moment a fragment of this story will seep into them. A record of a species that thought building a new cosmodrome in the Kazakh steppe was a step toward the stars, not realizing they were laying the final stones of their own grave marker. If you are that traveler, whoever you are, wherever you come from, remember that we didn't go quietly. We asked questions, we dug too deep, We made mistakes. We loved and feared and tried to understand the dark. And when the dark answered, we listened. Maybe that was our true sin. Or maybe it was our only act of courage. The hum is louder now. It's inside my teeth and my skull, in the spaces between thoughts. I can feel the shape of the niche waiting for us. It is vast, it is cold, it is patient. The floor beneath my feet is no longer concrete. It's something older, smoother, carved with symbols that feel at last familiar. I lie down. The ceiling above me curves, closing in, becoming stone. My last impression, before the world hardens, is of circles within circles, all aligning. The cosmodrome's rings matching the kurgans, matching the patterns in the sky. A perfect fit. The gatekeeper hums in satisfaction. We are filed. And in the brief sliver of time before my thoughts freeze into their final configuration, I send this story outward, a last pulse through the narrowing channels of space-time, a whisper from a tomb under the steps. Remember us. We were here. We opened the wrong door. And the universe remembered our shape.